الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا آوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا صدق الله علي عظيم اللهم صل Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Jami Mu'minin Mu'minat. First and foremost, I give my condolences to the Imam of our time, Imam Zaman, Jafar Sharif, and then to all of you on the occasions which we are commemorating in these nights, the Arba'in of the Shahadat of Imam Hussein, the return of the captives back to Karbala. As we mentioned, that our discussion is centered around Surah Al-Kahf, and particularly how Surah Al-Kahf, it relates to Imam Zaman Jafar Sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As we mentioned, that there are 5 stories around Surah Al-Kahf. One of those stories is, you could say, the meta story, and that was the story with regards to the Sha'n al-Nuzul, as the Ummah was being challenged, the Prophet himself, his prophethood was being challenged. And the other 4 stories are directly in the Surah Al-Kahf. We began with the first story, in a sense, and that was the companions of the cave, again, and their youthfulness, and the importance of our youth developing themselves, because as it is written within the Ruwayat of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam, that many of the companions of Imam Zaman, Jafar Sharif, they will be among the youth, among the Shabab. They will be the ones who are carrying that banner and carrying that torch. Not to say that there are not those who are elderly or those who have beards, that the grays are starting to come out, that they won't be the companions. Yes, that is the case as well, but most and the majority will be the youth. Just like we see in Karbala as well. There were tons of youth, and then you had those who were like Habib ibn Madahir, who was the elder of those who were martyred in Karbala. So those 5 stories, or at least the 4 stories in Surah Al-Kahf, it starts off with the companions of the cave, which we discussed yesterday. Then it moves to the story of the folks with the 2 gardens. This in itself, it relates to Imam Zaman Jafar Sharif in a way that it shows the incidents of the time. I'm not going to focus too much on this because that story is also short, but it is one that I think that we are all well acquainted with. The 2 individuals, one had been blessed, or they both had gardens, they both had sustenance, and mashallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives sustenance to all of his creation, whether they believe in him or whether they reject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sustains it. So in that particular story, if you read Surah Al-Kahf, that one individual, he had a more abundance of wealth, and he had 2 gardens, and the other had only 1 garden. The one who had 2 gardens became arrogant and thought that, well, you know what, this is, something that is from my hard work. I felt that he did not need to thank and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's one who had a smaller amount of wealth, meaning that he had 1 garden. He was grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and was reminding the other, says, no, this is from the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it went to the extent that the materialism, it blinded the one who had the abundance of wealth, whereby he even began to reject the concept of divinity. Began to reject this. And this is, again, the story of humanity. We see this. And so that moral of that story is that also in this time, as we await the reappearance of Imam Zaman Jafar Sharif, that we should not be blinded by materialism or get too much caught up or comfortable with this dunya that we think that, well, this is all that there is. The next story that we encounter in Surah Al-Kahf is the story of the encounter of Musa and Khidr, which is a very interesting story. And inshallah, we'll do this in two segments. Why? Because I want to point out that both of these individuals, especially the Prophet Musa and also Khidr, whether he is a prophet or not, and we're not going to go into that theological debate. Some say that yes, Khidr was a prophet. Some say that no, he's just among the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given a special task to. In any case, Imam Zaman, or aspects of the life of Imam Zaman, it resembles the aspects of the life of Musa, and also resembles the aspects of the life of Khidr. There are 5 aspects which we find the overlap between Nabi Musa alayhi salam and also Imam Zaman al-Jafar al-Sharif. And we want to discuss these things because it is important to understand and it is important to know. As Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi hafizahullah, he stated that, he says, بعد المعرفة, he says, أفضل العبادة بعد المعرفة انتظار الفرج. That the best worship and the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after having ma'rifah is what? To do intidhar al-faraj, to wait the reappearance of Imam Zaman, salawatullah. So that means that if we are truly going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we should, it begins with ma'rifah, having understanding. And ma'rifah as well is more than just knowledge or, hey, you know what, I know something, I've memorized something. To have ma'rifah is to have in-depth knowledge, to have a connection with that thing which one understands. Just to give you one example, and this is something that we all know, and what happens in our first day within the grave, that when we pass from this world and we go to the barzakh, or we're in the grave, what happens? Anyone? What happens? We know. What's the first thing that happens? The squeezing? Well, inshallah, it doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. But what is the first thing before that happens? Either the squeezing or the expansion. Exactly. We're going to be asked, exactly. We're going to be asked in the grave that who is your Lord? Who is your prophet? Who is your imam? What is your book? What is your qibla? Which way? And so that questioning, that task, is not something that is based off of memory. If you memorize, oh yes, Allah is my Lord, Allah Rabbi, wa Muhammad Nabiyyi, wa Aliyun Imami. That's just something that, yes, maybe we can sit and we can study in the weekend school and, oh, you know, our teacher's going to test us and we sit and we write it down. Now, that's just a reflex of memory. That ma'rifah that we need is to have true understanding of that. So when we are in that grave, it is not just a reflex of memory. I'll give you a very beautiful story of this. That Allama Tabatabai, you guys know who Allama Tabatabai is, right? Correct? So Allama Tabatabai, among our great ulama, mufassir, arif billah. So in the latter stages of his life, before he passed away, Allama Tabatabai, he, was in a state which, again, as we look at it, we see that it is considered to be like either Alzheimer's or dementia. That they said he could not recognize even some of his own kids. Like they would come and they would talk to him, he wouldn't know who they were. So his grandson mentions this. He says, I was there. He says we would take turns to look over our grandfather, Allama Tabatabai, and if he needed water or these type of things, so we would give him water. We would, care for him because he's in these latter stages of life and he doesn't recognize anyone. So his grandson says that one day I was there and I see him, he's starting to say something. His mouth is moving and I can hear a faint whisper. He He says, I can't make out what he's saying. He says, so I lean in closer and I ask him, I said, grandfather, what do you want? Do you want water? He says, then he answers, he says, I'm not talking to you. So he's like, oh, who are you talking to? He says, I'm talking to Allah. So in that state where he cannot recognize people in this world, his own kids, that knowledge and ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't leave him even in that moment. This is that ma'rifah. So, أفضل العبادة بعد المعرفة انتظار الفرج. So that ma'rifah is of what? Of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of the Prophet, of our Imam. And again, we have that dua of ma'rifah. Allahumma arifni nafsak fa innaka in lam tu'arifni nafsak lam a'rif nabiyak. To Allah, give me ma'rifah and understanding of you. If I don't have that ma'rifah of you, then I don't understand truly who my Prophet is, who your Prophet is. If I don't know your Prophet, then I don't know my Imam, your wali. And if I don't know your wali, then I have not followed the path of my faith. So the ma'rifah of Imam al-Zaman, Ajur Faraj al-Sharif, is very important. Why? Because that ma'rifah of Imam al-Zaman, it extends to what? The ma'rifah of the Prophet and the ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why when we look at this relationship between Musa alayhi salam and the Imam of our time, we gain that lesson from Surah Al-Kahf. It's important that, again, we understand that connection. And we don't become confused in this end of time where you have so many individuals, or not so many individuals, but there are some individuals who claim that, oh, they're the Imam. Or they claim that they represent the Imam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran, in this kind of parallel between Imam Zaman, Ajur Faraj al-Sharif, and a number of the Anbiya, he's given us this knowledge here, this proof, this evidence that, yes, as we believe in Imam Zaman, Ajur Faraj al-Sharif, that yes, this is based on what? The Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Sunnah was established and it moved on. So to give you the first thing. So that first point of resemblance between Imam Zaman, Ajur Faraj al-Sharif, and Nabi Musa alayhi salam is in the birth. So just as Imam Zaman, Ajur Faraj al-Sharif, that when he was born, there's only a handful of people who knew of that birth. Was it not? And likewise with Nabi Musa, there was only a handful of people who knew of that. That's because also the policies that Fir'aun he had placed into effect. That if there was any male child born, because he knew. In other words, he knew of the prophecy that there will come a prophet that will overturn his tyranny. That will bring about justice. There will be a prophet, there will be a savior who will come. And so he knew about it, and so he was waiting. But his waiting was in a different manner. And I'm waiting in order that I can kill this individual. Any child that's born, male child, do away with it. Do away with it. So that birth of Musa alayhi salam had to be in secret. So he was born. And of course, this is one of those things, and every once in a while this comes up, and it happens that some individuals, they look at the Shias, they say, especially the Ethnash, they say, oh, how do you believe in, this Imam? You have to have a living Imam. And, the birth, was the birth there or wasn't there? You have to have this living Imam. So some may make this what they call shubha, or bring this confusion up. Even a couple of weeks ago, I was dealing with someone who had this confusion. He says, no, this is on the Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yes, that even to the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Qasas, I'm going to just giving this reference to you that, again, you guys go and read the Quran. develop this relationship with the Quran. In Surah Qasas, this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions this, that he gives the revelation, Awha ila ummi Musa. Tells the mother of Musa, says, look, if you fear for his life, says, place him in the basket and let him go down the river. That fear was there. That they wanted to extinguish this light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah, He wouldn't allow that to happen. So when one says that, well, how is that possible? Or why do you believe in such a birth that only a few people can establish? So just as the birth of Musa was only established by a few people. It is part of that sunnatullah. Sallallahu alayhi Muhammad wa Muhammad. And again, and that concealment is not a point of weakness, but it is a point of where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He places that sunnat there, He places that avenue there to protect, again, His path. The second aspect that we find, again, between the likeness between the Musa alayhi salam and Imam Zaman al-Jafar al-Sharif is Muhammad wa is the pattern of oppression. The pattern of oppression. That's interesting. If you study what Fir'aun was doing, and you'll see that that pattern of oppression not only it existed at the time of Imam Hassan Askari, even before that, but even now. This kind of world domination, in a sense. This is what Fir'aun, this is what he was after, and that was what his tyranny led to, this kind of overarching domination that everyone had to submit to his control. That he was, again, the biggest, again, someone who painted himself in a divine light. Ana rabbukumul a'la. That there's no one greater than me. And then the oppression that Fir'aun, that he was erecting, as I said, that he was establishing, to do what? يُذْبِحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. To kill the men and to let women live. Again, it's not, if we think of it in terms of actual male and female, then we actually missed the point. And we miss how it applies to now. It's not simply just to kill the men who are men, but to kill this idea and concept of masculinity. And to what? To exacerbate feminism. We have this in the society. And what is masculinity? What does that represent? It represents this idea, again, what happens if someone is, masculine or has this machismo, as they say, that if you're trying to oppress this person, you're trying to do something, what happens? Automatically means like, what? Hey, they're going to resist oppression. They're going to resist being bent into one way or this way, right? Because that's this jalal, as you could say. But the feminine side is going to do what? Okay, well, let's mold, let's figure this out. It's a more easier approach. So Fir'aun, it wasn't just simply, we're going to kill the men and not do women alive. We're going to kill any element or even any idea of resistance, of opposition, of anyone who will even stand against us. Let's make sure that we eliminate that. And if you want to kind of mold, or even if there's something that's going to be oppressive, but you're going to be silent, no problem. You can stay. Again, look at the society we live in. And look at what happens to those who, again, in that concept of masculinity, that concept of machismo, that if they stand up, if they resist, oppression, they resist injustice. And what happens? Okay, well, we're going to silence this person. We're going to cancel that person. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So that same type of oppression exists during the time of Musa alayhi salam and also during the time of Imam Zaman Ajufar al-Sharif. That during his lifetime and leading up to the Dhuhur of Imam Zaman Ajufar al-Sharif. And of course, when you have such oppression, such injustice, it calls for there to be a savior. In fact, one of the very interesting elements and fine elements of this, in Nabi Yusuf, he was in Misr, in Egypt, before the birth of Musa. Again, there was probably about 300 years, when you actually have done the research, probably about 300 years between Yusuf and Musa, roughly. And it was Yusuf who told the people, when they began to follow him, he said that there will come after me someone who will save you from this oppression. It existed during the time of Nabi Yusuf. And he saw it. He did what he could. Again, he tried to bring about justice, some balance, of course, also educating the people, calling them towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But overarchingly, that oppression, it existed. It stayed. And before Nabi Yusuf, he passed away, he says, there will come after me someone who will save you from this. Again, so that birth of Nabi Musa alayhi salam was also, it was foretold that he would be born and he would come. The third aspect of resemblance between Nabi Musa and also Imam Zaman Ajufar al-Sharif, Salawat ala Muhammad, is the fear. Is the fear that existed in the environment. Again, Fir'aun, he was someone that, the atmosphere that he created an atmosphere that, he made it seem that, no, you don't want to oppose Fir'aun. That if he says something or if he does something, that, the people should fear him. Again, look at when he called the magicians, he says, okay, come. He says, I'm going to prove that this guy, this Musa alayhi salam, he's a charlatan. He's calling you, he's deviating you from my path. My path is the best path. And what happens when the magicians, they cast their ropes and their magic, and they were defeated by Musa, they made prostration. And what was Pharaoh's reaction? He says, what? You believe and I haven't given you permission to believe? This is the fear that he was going to strike in, that how dare you believe in something I don't give you permission to believe in? And honestly, if you look, this is this is the state of things. So okay, well, if you want to believe in God, even if you want to believe in Islam, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul, okay, believe in a way that we say it's okay to believe in. Be this way. Be this type of Muslim. Don't be that type of Muslim that has this, ar-rujuliyya, this masculinity, this machismo, this stance. And again, I'm not saying that women don't have rujuliyya. Don't misunderstand that. What I'm saying is that quality. Why? Because I can guarantee you that Zainab Kubra, salamu alayha, she is more powerful and more, I would say, greater than many of the men, all of us who are in this room. Her stance. But it's about a quality, a trait of what? Not bending to injustice. Or not fearing the enemy. Not fearing that. How many of us would speak up in the court of Yazid or Ibn Ziyad? Especially the way Zainab Kubra salam alayha, the way she spoke. Again, one year I did my lectures was on the speeches of Zainab Kubra salam alayha in Kufa and in Sham. Powerful speeches that show that she had absolutely no fear. No fear. So that's, again, the atmosphere that Fir'aun created was an atmosphere of fear. To make others cower to that oppression and injustice. Same type of atmosphere that is created, has been created before the dhuhr of Imam Zaman Ajal Sharif. To gag and silence, it stands for justice. The fourth similarity that we find between Imam Zaman Ajal Sharif and Nabi Musa alayhi salam is a concealment, an occultation, or something that is like an occultation. With Nabi Musa, we don't necessarily call it an occultation, but if you look at, again, this pattern of the life of Nabi Musa, that we see that his identity is hidden. His identity is hidden. That, again, he's born, and Nabi Musa, he's sent off on the bank, and he's actually living in the house of Fir'aun. He's living among the people. And so the people, they see him, but they don't even recognize him. One of the aspects of the dhuhr of Imam Zaman Ajal Sharif is said that when he actually announces, he comes and he says that he is the Imam and the believers are to attach themselves with him. It says that many of them, when they see the Imam, they're going to be surprised. They're like, oh, subhanallah. As if I've seen him somewhere before. They won't realize it. Why? Because the Imam, he is living. He's among us. That idea and concept of ghaiba doesn't mean that he's not alive. And this is one of the arguments that some people use. Oh, well, especially when they claim to be the Imam or the representative. Says, no, you have to have a living Imam, and that's why I'm the living Imam. Na'udhu billah. They said, because he must be living, he must be among you. How can you follow someone who's not living? No, the Imam is here. The Imam is among us. MashaAllah. Shaykh Basim is here. That, MashaAllah, but to Hajj with him. And this is one of the things that we know, even from the riwayat, that every year the Imam Zaman, he goes to what? Goes to Hajj. Somewhere there, he's there. Either we see him and don't recognize him. Some see him and maybe recognize him. But he's walking among the people. And Musa, he was walking among the people. He was among them. But not many people knew him. They didn't know who he was. So, in a sense, that was one aspect of the occultation of Musa, that he is there, he's present, but hidden from others. Hidden his true identity of who he was. And then he goes into a second aspect of occultation, that when he leaves from Egypt, again, after he has that encounter, he leaves, he goes to Madian. And he stays there for some time with Nabi Shu'aib, marries the daughter of Shu'aib. And then he comes back, and this is the fifth aspect of the relationship, or at least the example of Imam Zaman with Nabi Musa. What happens after that second occultation? He comes back to Egypt. And he does what? And he saves the people. Saves Bani Israel. And so when we understand that correlation, it gives us this understanding, this ma'rifah, that, okay, well, what is the reality of Imam Zaman? Well, why was his birth hidden? Why did the Imam go into occultation? How is it that we can say that the Imam, he walks among us, but we don't know him? It happened with Nabi Musa. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? that his sunnah, la tabdeel li sunnatillah. There's no change in that sunnah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, with regards to Imam Zaman, Ajafar Sharif, in this aspect, again, he's following that same pattern. It follows the exact pattern to a T. So where and why should one have doubt? But that is one of the things that the Ahlul Bayt, that they warn us about in this time of ghaiba. They say that, unfortunately, some people, they will see the ghaiba and how long it becomes, and then they will start doubting that, really, is there Imam? And God forbid that doubt leads to a point where those individuals who are charlatans, who say that, oh, well, I am the Imam, and they begin to attach themselves to those folks. Now, there are clear signs that when the Imam comes. And this is why we have to have that ma'rifah. أفضل العبادة بعد المعرفة. Understand that who the Imam is. Understand that the aspect of the birth, the ghaiba, and the presence of the Imam, that is all part of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ghaiba, again, listen to this. The ghaibat of Imam, when we say the occultation of the Imam, doesn't mean that he's not present. Some people think, oh, well, the Imam is in the ghaiba, he's not present. He's off somewhere far away. Then, no, the Imam is present. He is present, but he's not known. That is the best way to understand when we think of the ghaiba. And of course, there are incidents where, and folks who have actually seen the Imam, and they also become among those who are the helpers of Imam Zaman al-Jafar Sharif, even in the Ghaibatul Khubra. But of course, that in their lifetime, these are people who don't mention that they are, or they have that type of aspect, or that they have encountered the Imam. I'm only out because I couldn't sleep. Then he sees that Muqaddas al-Bayt, he's going towards the Haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. And at that time, they kept the gates closed at night. When at a certain point, he says, Muqaddas al-Bayt, he goes to the gates open up, and he goes in. And he says, and I slip in before the gate closes. And then he sees like the lanterns cut on as Muqaddas al-Bayt goes into, these are gas lanterns, those that you light. He says, they turn on as he goes in. He says, and I can hear my teacher asking a question. And then I hear a sound. He says, I can't understand or make sense of the sound. He says, for me, it was just a buzzing. That there was a response to it. Then he walks out. He leaves out. He says, and I follow him. And where does he go? He goes to Masjid al-Kufa. And the same thing happens. Doors open. He goes in. The lights are cut on. And then he asks his question. And all I hear is a kind of a buzzing sound. I can't make out the words. But anyway, he asks his question. And there was obviously something that was said to him. And who was there? He says, I don't know. So the student, he said, he left. And as Muqaddas al-Bayt, he walks away from Masjid al-Kufa and he goes behind him. He increases his pace and he asks him, he says, what are you doing? What was this? What did I see? He says, and I wouldn't leave him until he told me. Only because I was there, kept asking him. So he says that I will tell you, but you would have to promise me that you would not say a word as long as I'm live. So Muqaddas al-Bayt, he told me, he says that whenever I have any issue that I can't understand and resolve, he says, I would go to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, and Imam Ali would respond to me. He was like, this is why you couldn't hear what he was saying. He says, I asked him something today, and he told me to ask the Imam of your time. He says, ask your Imam. He says, and he told me to go to Masjid al-Kufa. He says, he's there. And you ask him this question. And you get the answer from the Imam. This is what Muqaddas al-Bayt. when the Imam himself, he says, in the time of ghaibah, he says, how do you benefit from the presence of the Imam? He gave us clear guidelines. Yes, he is that sun that is shining behind the cloud. He is that guidance, again, behind the ulama, as-salihin, righteous, pure ulama, who have purified themselves, who, again, are walking on the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhi wa salatu wasalam. Who are not calling to themselves, but calling to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, calling towards the Imam himself. So attach yourselves to the Imam. Gain that ma'rifat of the Imam. That ma'rifah that sometimes we find in individuals, and quite often some of the close companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam. One of them is like Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari. That subhanAllah, that his attachment to the Ahlul Bayt was such that we know that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he told to Jabir, he says, Ya Jabir, he says, you will meet my son, his name is Muhammad. And they would call him Baqir al-Ilm. He says, give him my son. Why did the Prophet tell Jabir? The Prophet could have wrote it and safeguarded it and pass it from one Imam to the next Imam and to the next Imam until it reaches to Imam Baqir. But he understood that not only will Jabir have such a long life, but what is the attachment of Jabir to the Ahlul Bayt? What is his love for the Ahlul Bayt? That love, it is seen in that moment in which Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, that as an elderly man, blind, that he returns, he goes to Karbala on the Arba'i. But when he goes, look at what he does. He goes to make that visitation with one of his companions, Atiyah, who is there to help him out. He says, Jabir, he goes to the Furat, first thing he does. And he takes a ghusl, he washes himself, he cleans himself, and then he wears fresh clothes. And then Jabir, how does he go and walk to the grave of Imam Hussein? Barefoot. No shoes. He walks barefoot. Subhanallah. Just to give you another story. Again, that ma'rifat of Ahlul Bayt. One of our great ulama, Ayatollah Burjurdi. The teacher of teachers, Ayatollah Burjurdi. He mentions this, he writes this before he passes away, that Ayatollah Burjurdi, he had an issue with his eyes. Again, if you look at him, up until his elderly age, like past 80s, he never wore glasses. But once he had an issue in his eyes, and the doctors couldn't operate on his eyes, he said, yeah, we can't fix this problem. So what did Ayatollah Burjurdi do? He said he got on the train and he was going to Karbala to make ziyarat of Imam Hussein. He said as he got on the train, he says the train it stopped in places. He says there were some of the Arabs and they were Bedouins. He says I could tell they were Badawi, and they walked to some place barefoot. They were bare feet. He says, and as they got on the train, he says the train was going. He says they laid down and took a rest. He says Ayatollah Burjurdi noticed that they had kind of dirt and mud on their feet from walking from the desert just to get to the train station. Ayatollah Burjurdi, he says he took the dirt and mud from between the feet of one of the guys who was wrestling and he placed it upon his eyes. I told Burjari, he says, after that, he says, his eyes got better and he never needed glasses. Again, this only comes from one who has ma'rifah. That's one who is walking to Imam Hussein to make that ziyarah. But who is this Imam? What is this imamate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us for guidance so that we can connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That is the ma'rifah that we need to have, at least strive for. So Jabir, he had that ma'rifah, he had that love. He said that when Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, when he walked barefoot and he was shown that this is the grave of Imam Hussein, just simply as he knew that he came close to the grave of Imam Hussein, it said he went unconscious. He fell upon the grave of Imam Hussein unconscious. Atiyah said, I sprinkled water upon his face. And then Jabir, he rose up and he began to cry out, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. He called 3 times, Oh Hussein, oh my beloved Hussein. Habib la yujib Habiba. That is it possible that the beloved does not answer the one who loves him. He's saying, I'm calling out to you, Hussein. You know how much I love you, Hussein. Is it possible that one who loves you, that you do not respond to him? How is it, oh my Hussein, that you can respond to me? How can you respond and your jugular veins have been cut? How can you respond, oh my Hussein, oh my beloved, when your head has been severed from your body? The heads were not even there, so how would he hear? But they said at one moment, there was someone coming. Atiyah told Jabir, he says, there's someone coming. It seems like there's a cloud of black. They're coming. Who is this coming? It was Imam Zayn al-Abidin and the caravan from Sham. They were holding the heads of the Ahlul Bayt. They had the head of Imam Hussein. They had the head of the Shuhada. They said, Jabir, that when he saw the Imam, when the Imam came close, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he asked Jabir, he says, Hal anta Jabir, are you Jabir? He says, Na'am ya Sayyidi, ana Jabir. He says, yes, I am Jabir. Then Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he began to take the hand of Jabir. He says, yes, oh Jabir, ya Jabir, ha huna qutila Abu Abdillah. He says, oh Jabir, this is the place where Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, this is where he was killed. This is where he was martyred. This is where he fell upon the plains of Karbala. Ya Jabir, ha huna dhubihat atfalu abi. That, oh Jabir, this is the place where the sons, where the children of my father, they were martyred. He showed them the place where Ali Akbar, he fell and he was martyred. He showed me the place where Abdullah al-Radhi, Ali Asghar, where he was shot in the arms of Imam al-Hussein. He says, Ya Jabir, ha huna wallah, dhubihat rijaluna, wa subiyat nisa'una, wa uhriqat khiyamuna. Oh Jabir, this is the place where our men folks, where they were martyred. Oh Jabir, this is the place where the women were taken captive. Oh Jabir, here's the place where our tents were, where they were set up on fire. I was imagining, just imagine, what would Jabir say? That Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he's showing him all of these places. This is where the Shuhada fell. But then what would he say? That now Jabir is being taken to a place that is far away from the other shuhada. What would he say? That, Ya Jabir, ha huna qutila Abul Fadl al-Abbas. That, oh Jabir, this is the place that Abul Fadl al-Abbas, that he fell to the plains of Karbala. He was explaining to Jabir that what happened to the shuhada, that how each one had fallen to the plains of Karbala, and they given their life for Imam al-Hussein. Inna lillah وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون اللهم بحق هذا المجلس الحسيني اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشف مرضانا ورحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وانصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Countless voices crying, mourning, weeping with grief and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices crying, mourning, weeping with grief and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices crying, mourning, weeping with grief and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil. On Ashura, the family of Hussein caused the earth to shake. On Ashura, the family of Hussein caused the earth to shake. It heard the swords clash across the field, cries of Alatash. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices crying, mourning, weeping with grief. Battle over, all the men had gone, no one there to defend. Battle over, all the men had gone, no one there to defend. The veils were snatched, Julia pulled from ears, Sakina's cry so pure. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices weeping with grief and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Paraded through the streets and markets to Kufa and Sham. Paraded through the streets and markets to Kufa and Sham. Oh people, did you not know them? They are of Rasul. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of the court in Sham, the palace of Yazid, tied in chains in pain. The court in Sham, the palace of Yazid, tied in chains in pain. Zainab stood defending Islam for a soul so brave. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab. Countless voices crying, mourning, weeping with grief and pain. Had I been there, I would defend the veil of Zainab.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا نبي الله. السلام عليك يا خاتم الأنبياء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت، وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميع شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أئمة المسلمين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان الأمان من فتنة الزمان وشر الشيطان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك، وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لولي